All right, welcome to the Intro to Web, Intro to JavaScript portion of this curriculum. This is where we start getting into the conversation of this is how you make your money, this is why people pay you. Up to this point, we have done HTML and CSS, which if you just know HTML and CSS outside of your very rudimentary jobs, which are not going to pay very well, if anything at all, yeah, there's no reason for, let's back up a little bit. WordPress, Wix, Squarespace, if you only know HTML and CSS, you've already been automated. Drag and drop software has gotten that good where basically whatever you want from a static website standpoint, I can make it on Wix or Squarespace or WordPress. So if you want to get paid, if you want to be just a front-end developer, you have to know JavaScript inside and out and better than everyone else. And that is going to be a challenge because a lot of JavaScript developers are out there because it's the only front-end web language. So there's a lot of people that use it because they have to, okay? So it's hyper competitive. With that said, if you want a shot at just being a front-end developer, this is what you're going to have to master, right? So let's get into that. JavaScript is a programming language. It allows you functionality based on user input. Most of the time you can have user states that need JavaScript, or browser states, or just states in general that can use JavaScript. But for the most part, JavaScript is there for user functionality. So if a user clicks on a button, you can do something with that button or click event, all right? Single-threaded programming languages. So in general, this is not 100% true. JavaScript is a single-threaded language. What that means is that you have to understand that JavaScript is a fundamentally different developing experience than what a threaded language would be, like a C#. And if you're a Alfred State student, this is going to be one of the bigger challenges because you have been taught on a threaded language all the way up until this point, all right? JavaScript is based on events, all right? Events typically are generated by users, like I already said, or the browser. All events are put into the event loop, which we'll get into in just a second. JavaScript is non-blocking and asynchronous. An asynchronous programming language means that even if the code happens or is parsed before another set of code, that does not mean that it's going to be executed first. It's the nature of single-threaded languages, and we'll get into a couple of examples here in this presentation about that. JavaScript is object-oriented. Just like every other programming language, the biggest difference is that absolutely everything in JavaScript is an object. You can pass in functions if you want to. You can basically do whatever you want in terms of addressing the properties of a thing that is an object, okay? JavaScript is a softly typed language, which this means is that you can define a variable and give it a string, and it's going to be a string, and then redefine that same variable as a bool or a number or an array, and it's going to be a bool, number, or array, okay? So here is a visual example of what JavaScript is allowing for functionality. That animation of sliding up is a JavaScript animation. Submitting Sunday here for the edit, that is JavaScript. We're going to take all that information for day off, start and end, and we're going to say, hey, let's go ahead and edit this particular thing. And now we're getting into a particular service, and now we just change that middle slot to passive. And then we're going to add and remove time slot. That's all JavaScript, right? There's no HTML tag that will allow you to do this. This is all custom work, custom logic, and this is where you make your money because this is what Squarespace is not going to be able to do. This is something that WordPress is not going to be able to do. You have to have custom software, custom code, custom logic to be able to achieve something like this, where you can have a remove time slot button or add time slot button or just delete service. All right. So in general, your WordPress, your Wixes of the world, they're not going to edit the DOM very well. So I believe that is good enough for this example. So here's an example of that JavaScript animation that I was talking about, and this is what it would take. Obviously, you're just being exposed to this right now, so don't worry about it too much about understanding it. Just understand that, well, right here is the animation. The animation portion itself was actually probably the smallest portion. Everything else to get it to work in terms of logic, that is what took most of the time getting it to work properly. Okay, so with that said, that's going to be one of your challenges coming through, understanding that, look, there's a lot of framework that has to happen to get something that seems so simple done properly. All right, so this is a presentation about the event loop. I really wanted the animation on this. I took away the sound just so I can talk over this animation. So this little white block here, think of that as your execution thread, which again, JavaScript is single threaded, so there's one block. Now, this animation is slowing this down so we can actually talk about it, which is awesome, but think of your event loop as being able to process one thing at a time. Again, not universally true, there's ways around this, but at your level, this is where you need to start at, okay? So what this is going to do is that, hey, we just entered a task into the event loop. And as this white block comes through, this execution thread comes through, it's going to come through here, it's going to hit that task, I'm going to complete that task, and then we're going to cycle through again and then complete the next task. Now, with that said, I really want to point out that this is on the left side of that loop, and then what they're going to talk about here is the rendering steps. There's going to be a second portion of that loop completely dedicated to the browser. Okay, so notice that these gates are here. So when this gate's open, this is essentially saying that, hey, this portion actually needs executionable threads. Okay, so the browser tries to be as efficient as possible. So there's a couple things happening here. First, a lot of things are tied to your frame rate. So the faster the frame rate, the more that these browser steps have to happen. So as we come through here, the browser just said that, hey, I need styling, layout, and painting to be rendered. I need this re-rendered. Something changed on the DOM. I need this re-rendered. Okay, so we come through here, go through all that. Now, this is where JavaScript gets a little difficult because, okay, we got this GIF here. This is getting re-rendered all the time. That highlight is actually an event from the browser, and when we hit this while true loop, which is an endless loop, what ends up happening is that, well, to the user, the website is broken. However, if we come through here, what is actually happening is that this gate is going to open, this task is going to run, which is that endless loop, and then we're going to get stuck there because it's an endless loop. We're going to run that task forever, and then we're going to get this over here saying, hey, browser needs this re-rendered. Okay, well, we'll get to it when we can, and then you're going to get tasks over here that are going to go into the event loop, and well, we'll get to it when we can, just after this endless loop that runs forever. I'll get to it after forever. Okay, so I think you get the point at this point. So this is where you need to be very, very careful, and this is how you would make your money as a JavaScript developer, understanding how the event loop actually interacts with, well, one, the user events, and then the browser itself, so you can actually optimize and get a bunch of performance out of not only the browser, but the user experience itself. And most of the time, if you're going to be a front-end developer, you're probably a UX expert as well, where you're creating custom code to make sure that the user experience is good. And you can look up any study that you want. Almost all of them are going to be, hey, performance of the browser, second to content, is going to be the thing that people are looking for. So with that said, that's going to be the end of this mini presentation here with the animation. Key takeaways. Task can block renders. Task can block other tasks as well. But if you have a task that's going to take a long time, you're going to have a problem. At this level, I'm not going to show you how to do a web worker, but if you have something that's going to take, say, a second or 2 seconds, you're dropping a bunch of frames, you're going to have some lag, you're going to have some judder. It's not going to work for you, okay? You need to be very cautious about what you are putting into your code for JavaScript, okay? For this level, just be aware that one task is performed each loop cycle. Technically not true, but this gets you up and running, okay? So speed of event loop is dependent on the CPU, which is true. Renders are performed when needed, so the browser is going to be as smart as possible about CPU resources. And then most tasks are performed asynchronously, which we have an example coming up with. So what we have to do is explain what is going on here. Because JavaScript is asynchronous, this isn't going to work the way that you think it's going to. So for a second, let's assume that we are using a synchronous language. So if I set a timeout, and then I say wait 3 seconds, and then do this. Set another timeout, wait 2 seconds, do this. Set a timeout, wait 1 second, and then do this. If this was a synchronous language, this is what would happen. Set timeout, wait 3 seconds, run this, step 1. Set timeout, wait 2 seconds, run this, step 2. Set timeout, wait 1 second, step 3. Asynchronous is the exact opposite. And the reason for this, well, first I'm pointing this out, step 3, 2, and 1. The reason for this is because it's asynchronous. What this is going to do is say, I'm going to set a timeout. Run in 3 seconds, run this event, put it into the event loop. Okay. In 2 seconds, put this into the event loop. In 1 second, put this into the event loop. Okay. So we're not actually waiting. We're not waiting for this to be done. We're not waiting for this to be done. We're not even waiting for this to be done. So when these are still in set timeout phase, where we're just waiting to put this into the event loop, we can run anything else. This is why it's asynchronous. So what ends up happening is that we're going to rifle through these. Let's say it's a millisecond. Then we can do anything else for 1 second. And then we're going to run this. And then we can do anything else for, well, it'd be 1 more second at this point. 1 more second, and then we're going to run step 2. And then we can do anything else for 1 second, and then we're going to run this. That's how asynchronous works. Okay, a more realistic example, if we're using a fetch call to an API, or even to your own server, like in this case, these take a long time in computer world. So even if this is 50 milliseconds, that's a long time. So we're going to run this. We're going to request root. We're sending some data, okay, and then application JSON to tell the server that we are sending it JSON. And then we got our callback function here. And again, we haven't went over this a whole lot, but this is going to be parsed first. It's going to be a hit first. If this was a synchronous language, we would hit fetch, run the callback, and then alert would be next. Because it's asynchronous, what's going to end up happening is we're going to hit fetch, we're going to send the data, we're going to wait for the post, which is this alert down here, and then after the server responds with something, then we're going to run this asynchronous function down here, or the callback function. So here's that example. Click, click. Okay, there we go. We're going to submit this. waiting for post, which is that alert. We're going to hit OK here, and now we get information back from the server. Okay, last thing we need to talk about is that everything in JavaScript is an object. Actually, there's two more. I lied to you. There's this and then the scoping thing. So everything in JavaScript is an object. We can pass in this test function down here, redefine it, and then call it. So let's just go over that. So let's take a step back. Function, test function. We're defining test function. Inside a test function, we want to run this console log of logging. Okay? Simple enough up to this point. We are going to define a new function, log, console log, and then we're going to have a parameter of passed function. Okay? We wrapped this function inside of a self-initiating function, and then we passed in that parameter of test function that we defined up here. So the way the logic is working here is define this, pass it in, rename it, run the function. That's how the logic is working. So if we run this video, so we got passed function right here. So we went through all this, we defined it, passed it in, renamed it, we're running it, and now this is running up here even though it was on top. Everything's an object. You can pass functions into functions. And this is exactly what callbacks are. So you have to do this in JavaScript. Something like C# is not going to be very happy about doing this. All right, JavaScript is softly typed. Variables can be redefined. That's what essentially this page is saying. And we got an example coming up. So think about what's happening here. If you have been in our Programming 1 class, you should be able to get this question right, what I'm about to ask. I'm defining first name here, string of Justin. And then I'm going to address first name with a bool of true. And then if I come down here and I count to log first name, what do you think this value is going to be? Is it going to be a string of Justin, or is it going to be a bool of true? Think about that for a second. I'm going to play this video. All right, we hit the first name, string of Justin. All right, we hit the second addressing of the first name, a bool of true, and then my name is true. So if you guessed bool, okay, you guessed right. If you knew it was going to be bool of true, good for you. So what is happening here is that we are defining a new variable of first name, and we're giving it a value of, well, we're defining it to a string, and then we're giving it a value of Justin, a string of Justin. Okay? This is also going to give it a new pointer. When we come down here, first name, because we have access to this variable up here, this is the same pointer right here. And then we're going to redefine that pointer that we had, that space in memory that we had, as a bool of true. So when we come down here, we still have access to that original definition, which is right here. So it's going to be a bool of true and not a string of Justin. So this will get you more than once when you're developing. So just be aware that it's there. Okay, so that's going to do it for this presentation. Key takeaways are event loops. All right, just make sure that you understand that JavaScript is single-threaded, that everything is based on the event loop, so you can do one task per cycle, and then understand that JavaScript is a softly typed programming language. So global variables are allowed, but it makes your code very fragile. Okay? With that said, that's going to do it for this one, and I'll see you in the next one.